There are places in North America where the silence is heavy. It is a silence that presses against your ears, born of deep snow and ancient pines. In the winter months, the Great Lakes region and the boreal forests of Canada become a landscape of white and gray. The wind howls like a dying animal, and the temperature drops so low that breath freezes in your throat. It is beautiful, yes, but it is also a graveyard. For thousands of years, the Algonquin-speaking tribes of the North have warned of a spirit that walks these frozen woods. It is not just a predator, it is a manifestation of the worst human sins: greed, gluttony, and the breaking of the ultimate taboo. Welcome back to the Pale Road. Tonight, we are driving north, past the tree line into the heart of winter to confront the Wendigo. To understand the Wendigo, you must understand the cold. In the depths of a northern winter, starvation was a very real threat for early hunters and settlers. The isolation could drive a mind to the breaking point. The Wendigo is the embodiment of that breaking point. It is said that the Wendigo was once human, a hunter, perhaps, or a traveler lost in the snow. Driven mad by hunger, with no game to hunt and the supplies gone, the person makes a choice. To survive, they consume human flesh. In that moment, the humanity dies, and the monster is born. The descriptions of the creature are the stuff of nightmares. It is gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tight over protruding bones. Its complexion is the ash gray of death. Its eyes are pushed back deep into their sockets, looking like glowing embers in a skull. Its lips are tattered and bloody, chewed away by its own hunger, and it gives off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. But the most terrifying aspect of the Wendigo is its size. Legend says that with every meal it consumes, it grows in size, so that its hunger can never be satisfied. It is eternally starving, eternally hunting. This is not just a campfire story to scare children. In the historical records of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Hudson's Bay Company, there are files that defy explanation. The most famous, and perhaps the most tragic, is the case of Swift Runner. The year is 1878. Swift Runner was a Cree trapper living in what is now Alberta, Canada. He was a big man, well respected by the local priests and traders. He was a family man, with a wife and 6 children. But that winter was harsh. The game disappeared. The snow was relentless. In the spring of 1879, Swift Runner stumbled into the Catholic mission in St. Albert. He was alone. He told the priests that his family had starved to death, one by one, and that he was the only survivor. The priests were suspicious. Swift Runner didn't look like a man who had been starving. He looked healthy, well-fed. He weighed nearly 200 pounds. The police were called. They forced Swift Runner to lead them back to his winter camp to recover the bodies. The journey took days. As they got closer to the camp, Swift Runner began to act strangely. He would run ahead, laughing hysterically. He would scream into the woods. At night, he claimed he could hear a voice calling his name, urging him to eat. When they arrived at the campsite, the police found a scene of horror that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There were no bodies, just bones, cracked open, the marrow sucked dry, cooking pots filled with human fat. Swift Runner had not just survived, he had feasted. Evidence showed that he had killed his wife and children one by one. But the most disturbing detail was that there were emergency food supplies in the camp that had not been touched. There was flour, there was dried meat. Swift Runner had chosen to eat his family. At his trial, Swift Runner did not plead insanity in the way we understand it. He claimed he had been possessed. He said a Wendigo spirit had entered his dreams, turning his heart to ice and making him crave the flesh of his kin. He said he couldn't stop. On December 20, 1879, Swift Runner was hanged at Fort Saskatchewan. Before the trapdoor opened, he made a speech, acknowledging his guilt, but insisting that the thing that killed his family was not him, but the spirit that rode him. This phenomenon became known to psychologists as Wendigo Psychosis, a culture-bound syndrome where individuals in these northern tribes would develop an intense craving for human flesh and a fear that they were turning into cannibals. But is it just madness? Or is it something else? The woods of the north are vast. There are millions of acres where no human foot has stepped in decades. Hunters today still report strange things in those woods. An uneasy feeling of being watched from high up in the trees. A foul stench carried on the wind that smells of rotting meat. And distinct, heavy footsteps that crunch in the snow, pacing outside their tents at night. The Wendigo is a creature of the wind. Some say it can move faster than the eye can follow, its feet not touching the ground, gliding just above the snow. It mimics human voices to lure you out of safety. You might hear the voice of a loved one calling for help from the darkness of the trees. "Help me, I'm cold, come find me." But if you follow that voice, you don't find your friend. You find the hunger. If the story of Swift Runner was an anomaly, a singular event of madness in the 19th century, we could perhaps sleep easier. We could dismiss the Wendigo as a dusty relic of a superstitious past, a cautionary tale told by elders to keep young men from reckless behavior during the famine months. But the pale road does not end in the history books. It stretches into the present day. The hunger did not die with Swift Runner. The spirit did not vanish when the electric lights of modern cities pushed back the darkness. It simply retreated deeper into the treeline, waiting for those foolish enough to think they are the masters of the wild. What happens when you encounter this entity today? It rarely begins with a monster crashing through the trees. It begins with the mind. Folklore describes the onset of Wendigo fever. It starts subtly, a strange scent on the wind, not just the smell of decay, but something sharper, like sulfur or wet fur mixed with the metallic tang of ozone. Then comes the unease, the feeling that the woods, usually full of the sounds of birds and squirrels, have gone completely silent. This is the Oz effect, a sudden total silence where nature itself seems to be holding its breath in terror. Then, the heat. Despite the freezing temperatures of a Minnesota or Ontario winter, the victim begins to burn up. They strip off their clothes, complaining of a fire in their marrow. They reject normal food. Deer meat tastes like ash. Bread tastes like sand. The only thing that smells appetizing is the person sitting next to them. Let's move to a more recent account. This story comes from the deep woods of northern Minnesota, near the Boundary Waters, in the late 1990s. Two friends, experienced hunters whom we'll call Jack and Eric, decided to spend a week in a remote cabin during deer season. This wasn't a glamping trip. The cabin was miles from the nearest paved road, accessible only by snowmobile. It was off-grid, no electricity, just a wood stove and propane lanterns. For the first 2 days, everything was normal. They tracked deer, drank whiskey by the fire, and enjoyed the isolation. But on the third night, a blizzard rolled in. It was a whiteout, burying the cabin in drift after drift of snow. The wind screamed around the eaves of the shack, rattling the windows in their frames. Around midnight, Eric woke up. He shook Jack awake, his finger pressed to his lips. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Jack listened. Beneath the howling of the wind, there was a sound coming from the roof. It wasn't the tapping of a branch. It was a slow, heavy dragging sound. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. Like something heavy was pulling itself along the shingles with long claws. They grabbed their rifles and waited. The sound circled the roof, then moved down the side of the wall. Then, silence. Jack wanted to go out and check, thinking it might be a bear, although bears should have been hibernating. Eric refused to open the door. He was pale, sweating profusely despite the drafty cabin. He said the air in the room suddenly smelled like a slaughterhouse. The next morning, the storm had broken. The sun was blindingly bright on the fresh snow. They went outside to check for tracks. What they found made no sense. There were footprints on the roof, but they weren't bear tracks. They looked like human feet, but elongated, stretching nearly 18 inches long. The toes were splayed and tipped with deep gouges where claws had dug into the frost. The track circled the cabin 3 times and then led off into the thickest part of the forest. But here is the impossible part. The stride between the steps was over 10 feet. Whatever made those tracks wasn't running. It was walking casually, covering 10 feet with a single step. Eric wanted to leave immediately. He was agitated, his eyes darting around the treeline. He kept saying he could hear his name being called. Jack couldn't hear anything but the wind in the pines. "It's my mom," Eric said, his voice trembling. "Can't you hear her? She's out there. She's hurt." Jack knew Eric's mother had passed away 5 years prior. He tried to reason with his friend, tried to tell him it was the wind playing tricks, a case of cabin fever. But the Wendigo lore speaks specifically of this mimicry. The creature is an apex predator of humans. It doesn't just hunt our bodies, it hunts our empathy. It steals the voices of those we love to lure us out of the safety of the firelight. That afternoon, while Jack was chopping wood, he turned around and Eric was gone. There was no shout, no struggle. The cabin door was swinging open. Jack grabbed his rifle and followed Eric's tracks in the snow. They didn't lead to the snowmobiles. They led straight into the dense forest, following the same path the giant tracks had taken earlier. Jack ran, screaming his friend's name. About a mile into the woods, he found Eric's coat, then his boots. Eric was running barefoot in 20 below zero weather. Jack pushed on, his lungs burning from the cold air. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, blue shadows through the trees. He finally came to a clearing. The tracks stopped. Not at a tree, not at a cliff. They simply ended in the middle of a pristine field of snow. There were no other tracks around them. It was as if Eric had been plucked straight up into the sky. Jack stood there in the silence, and then, from high above him, perhaps from the top of a 100-foot pine, or perhaps from the air itself, he heard a sound. It wasn't a scream. It was a mimicry of his own voice, distorted and hollow, repeating the last thing he had yelled. "Eric! Eric! Eric!" Jack didn't wait. He ran back to the cabin, started one of the snowmobiles, and drove through the night until he hit the main road. He never went back for his gear. The search and rescue teams that went out days later found nothing. No body, no Eric, just a pile of clothes and a rifle left in the snow. This story highlights the true horror of the Wendigo. It is the spirit of the lonely places. It thrives on isolation. It takes you when you are most vulnerable, stripping away your sanity before it consumes your flesh. But what exactly is it physically? Cryptozoologists and native elders differ in their descriptions, but the core features remain revoltingly consistent. It is a creature of excess and starvation simultaneously. It is said to have a heart made of solid ice. This heart is the source of its power and its curse. Because of this frozen heart, the Wendigo can never feel warmth, never feel full. When it eats a person, it doesn't just digest the meat, it absorbs the essence, growing in size relative to the meal. If it eats a small man, it grows a little. If it eats a large man, it grows larger. This ensures that it is always just a little bit hungrier than it was before. It is a biological impossibility, a violation of the laws of physics. Killing a Wendigo is nearly impossible in the lore. Bullets pass through its gaunt frame as if shooting through smoke. It heals instantly, the dead flesh knitting itself back together. You cannot outrun it. It moves on the wind. You cannot hide from it. It can smell the blood in your veins. The only way to destroy a Wendigo, according to the legends, is fire. Absolute, purifying fire. You must shatter the heart of ice. Some legends say you must drive a silver stake through the chest to shatter the heart, then burn the body to ash, and scatter the ashes in running water so it can never reform. But who has the strength to stand their ground against a 10-foot monstrosity that smells like a grave and speaks with your father's voice? Most people just freeze. The primal brain takes over the part of us that remembers when we were not the top of the food chain. We become prey. So, as we leave the frozen forests and return to the safety of the asphalt, remember the lesson of Swift Runner. The line between man and monster is thinner than we think. It is drawn in hunger. It is drawn in isolation. The next time you are driving on a lonely highway through the northern pines, and the snow starts to fall, check your mirrors, check your gas gauge, and if you see a tall, gaunt figure standing in the tree line, watching you with eyes that burn like cold coals, do not slow down. The Wendigo is always hungry, and tonight, the pale road is long, dark, and very, very cold.